The first rule of Millbrook was simple: never look at the sky after 9 p.m. Sarah Chen learned this before she could read, whispered by her mother, in the same tone one might use to warn a child about hot stoves or busy streets. But unlike those warnings, this one came with no explanation. Just the rule hanging in the air, like a noose, and the unspoken understanding that breaking it meant something worse than pain. She was 32 years old now, sitting in her Seattle apartment, when the letter arrived. The envelope was yellowed at the edges, addressed in her grandmother's shaky handwriting. Inside a single sentence, "Your mother is asking for you. Come home." Sarah hadn't been back to Millbrook in 15 years. She'd left the day after her high school graduation, driven straight through the night, until the town's peculiar silence was replaced by the honest noise of the highway. She'd promised herself she'd never return. But mothers, even strange ones in strange towns, have a way of pulling their daughters back. The drive took 14 hours. As her car crossed the unmarked boundary, there were no signs, but you always knew when you entered Millbrook the air changed. It became thicker somehow, pressing against her eardrums like she was descending into deep water. The radio crackled and died, leaving only static that sounded almost like breathing. Welcome back to the channel, friends. I want to ask you, where are you watching this from right now? Are you somewhere safe, somewhere normal? Because the story I'm about to tell you comes from a place that's neither. If this unsettles you, good. It should. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment telling me if you'd follow the rules or if curiosity would get the better of you. Because in Millbrook, curiosity doesn't just kill cats. It kills everything. Millbrook looked exactly as Sarah remembered it. Population 847, nestled in a valley that shouldn't exist according to any geological survey. The town had one main street lined with buildings that all seemed to date from the 1950s, though some had been there much longer. There was Morton's General Store, the Evergreen Diner, a post office that was only open on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the church with no denomination listed on its sign. The houses were all variations of the same Cape Cod style, painted in muted colors that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Every lawn was perfectly maintained. Every hedge was trimmed to exactly the same height. At first glance, it looked like any other small American town trying desperately to hold on to a past that had already slipped away. But there were differences if you knew where to look. Every home had its curtains drawn before dusk. Every door had 3 locks, not 2. And every single residence had a list posted on the inside of their front door, rules that had been passed down through generations, typed on yellowed paper and laminated for preservation. Sarah's childhood home sat at the end of Maple Street, a pale blue house that her mother had maintained with obsessive precision. As Sarah pulled into the driveway, she noticed the garden was overgrown, the first sign that something was truly wrong. Her mother would sooner let the house burn down than allow dandelions to flourish in her flower beds. Her grandmother opened the door before Sarah could knock. Eleanor Chen was 86 years old, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, but her eyes were sharp as broken glass. "You shouldn't have come," Eleanor said, but she stepped aside to let Sarah in. The house smelled of mothballs and something else, something organic and wrong, like fruit left too long in the sun. Sarah's mother wasn't in the living room. She wasn't in the kitchen. Eleanor led her upstairs to the master bedroom, and that's when Sarah saw her. Margaret Chen lay in bed, her skin paper thin and stretched too tight over her bones. but it was her eyes that made Sarah's breath catch. They were open, unblinking, staring at the ceiling with an intensity that suggested she was watching something no one else could see. "How long has she been like this?" Sarah whispered. 3 weeks, Eleanor replied. "It started the night she looked up." Sarah felt her blood turn to ice water. "She looked at the sky after 9. Eleanor nodded slowly. "She said she heard her name being called, said it was your father's voice." But Sarah's father had been dead for 20 years. He'd followed one of the other rules, the one about never entering the woods alone after dark, and had returned 3 days later, walking mechanically down Main Street, in the clothes he'd died in, speaking, in a voice that wasn't quite his own. They'd buried him a second time properly, this time with salt and iron and prayers in a language Sarah didn't recognize. "The doctor came," Eleanor continued. "Said there's nothing physically wrong with her. Her body works fine. She eats when we feed her, drinks when we give her water. But she won't stop staring up, won't close her eyes, and sometimes..." Eleanor's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Sometimes I see her lips moving, like she's having a conversation with something." Sarah approached the bed slowly. Her mother didn't acknowledge her presence, didn't blink, didn't shift her gaze even a fraction of an inch. "Mom," Sarah said softly, "it's me. It's Sarah." Nothing. Sarah reached out and touched her mother's hand. It was ice cold despite the warm room. And then just for a moment, her mother's index finger twitched. Once, twice, 3 times. It took Sarah a moment to recognize the pattern. Morse code. Her father had taught them both back when Sarah was 10 years old, before the woods took him. 3 short taps, 3 long, 3 short, SOS. That first night back, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in her childhood bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars she'd stuck to the ceiling when she was 12. They'd seemed magical then. Now they felt like a mockery, fake stars, to replace the real ones she could never look at after dark. At 3:47 a.m. she heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, too heavy to be her grandmother's shuffling gait. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she watched the shadow pass beneath her door. The footsteps stopped directly outside her room. Then came the knocking. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. SOS. Sarah's rational mind screamed at her not to open the door, but 15 years away from Millbrook had dulled her instincts. She'd lived in a world where knocking was just knocking, where shadows were just shadows. She'd almost convinced herself that the rules had been paranoid superstition, small-town folklore designed to keep children obedient. She opened the door. The hallway was empty. The motion sensor nightlight her grandmother had installed cast everything in a sickly green glow. Sarah stepped out, her bare feet silent on the worn carpet. That's when she noticed her mother's bedroom door was open. It hadn't been open when she'd gone to bed. Eleanor always kept it closed, said it was better that way, kept things contained. Sarah walked toward the open door, her heart hammering against her ribs. As she approached, she could hear something, a wet, rhythmic sound, like breathing through fluid-filled lungs. She peered inside. Her mother was sitting up in bed, not lying down as she'd been hours earlier, but sitting perfectly upright, her head tilted back at an angle that would have been painful for anyone with normal neck flexibility. Her mouth was open wider than should have been possible, and from her throat came that wet, rattling breath. But what made Sarah's blood freeze was what she saw in the window behind her mother. Something was looking in. The shape was roughly humanoid, but wrong in every proportion. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent in too many places. Its head, if it could be called a head, was smooth and featureless, except for a vertical slit where a mouth should be. And from that slit came a sound like wind whistling through a canyon, except the wind was forming words. Sarah Chen. It whispered, and its voice was 1,000 voices layered on top of each other. Look up and see what your mother sees. Sarah's hand found the door frame, gripping it so hard her knuckles turned white. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she couldn't move. The thing at the window tilted its head, mimicking curiosity, and that vertical slit widened into something that might have been a smile. She looked up, it continued. She saw the truth. She saw us. We are always watching, Sarah Chen. We are always there just above your head, waiting for you to acknowledge us. Your mother was brave. She looked. Will you? Sarah's eyes began to drift upward involuntarily, as if pulled by an invisible force. She could feel it, the terrible, overwhelming compulsion to tilt her head back, to lift her gaze to the ceiling, to the roof, to the sky beyond. Whatever was up there, it wanted to be seen. It needed to be seen. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, Sarah tore her eyes away and stumbled backward. She slammed the door shut, pressing her back against it, and slid down to the floor. Her whole body was shaking. From inside the room, she heard her mother's voice for the first time in weeks. But it wasn't her mother's voice, not really. It was a hollow echo of it, like a recording played through broken speakers. Why don't you look, baby? It's beautiful up there. So beautiful. Your father is here too. We're all here waiting for you. Sarah clamped her hands over her ears and ran back to her room. She locked the door, pushed her dresser in front of it, and climbed into bed with all the lights on. She didn't sleep. She couldn't sleep, because now she knew the rules weren't superstition. They were survival. Morning came slowly to Millbrook, the sun rising through a perpetual haze that made everything look slightly out of focus. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, 3 cups of coffee deep, while Eleanor made eggs that Sarah couldn't bring herself to eat. You saw something, Eleanor stated. It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded. The Watchers, Eleanor said, cracking another egg with more force than necessary. That's what the old-timers call them. Nobody knows what they really are. Nobody wants to know. All we know is the rules keep us safe. Safe? Sarah's laugh was bitter. Mom looked up once and now she's... Your mother broke the first rule. Eleanor interrupted, her voice sharp. And now she's paying the price. We all knew it could happen. That's why the rules exist. Sarah stared at her grandmother. You're saying this is normal, that people here just accept this? What choice do we have? Eleanor set a plate in front of Sarah with shaking hands. We can't leave. Nobody who tries to leave Millbrook ever makes it past the county line. They either turn around and drive back, or... She trailed off, but Sarah knew what she meant. or they disappear. Sarah had learned that lesson when she was 7. Tommy Reeves, a boy from her 3rd grade class, had told everyone he was going to run away. His family had tried to stop him, but he'd snuck out one night and stolen his father's truck. They found the truck 3 days later crashed into a tree exactly 1 mile outside town limits. Tommy was in the driver's seat, still gripping the steering wheel, his eyes open and staring at something no one else could see. His mouth was frozen in a scream that had never made it out. The official report said it was an accident. The unofficial truth was that Millbrook didn't let go of its children. "I need to understand," Sarah said. "I need to know what's happening to her. There has to be someone in this town who knows more." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. "Go see Jack Thornton. He lives in the Old Victorian at the end of Oak Street. He's different. Been studying this town longer than anyone. But be careful, Sarah. Knowledge has a price here. Sometimes it's better not to know." Sarah found Jack Thornton's house easily. It was the only Victorian in a sea of Cape Cods, and it looked like something out of a Gothic novel. The paint was peeling, the garden was deliberately wild, and every window had heavy curtains drawn despite the daylight. She knocked 3 times. The door opened immediately, as if he'd been waiting for her. Jack Thornton was in his early 60s with wild gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. He wore a cardigan with holes in the elbows and held a notebook filled with cramped handwriting. "You're Margaret Chen's daughter," he said before Sarah could introduce herself. "You look like her, like she used to look before she looked up," Sarah finished. "I need to know what happened to her, what those things are." Jack's expression darkened. "Come in. But first, have you read the list, all of it?" "The rules, of course. My mother made sure I memorized them before I was 6. Then you know Rule 7. Sarah's mind raced through the list. Rule 7, never trust anyone who asks you to break the other rules. "I'm not asking you to break anything," Jack said, stepping aside. "I'm asking if you want to understand why the rules exist." His living room was more archive than living space. Every wall was covered in newspaper clippings, hand-drawn maps and photographs. Some of the photos looked old, dating back to the 1800s. Others were recent, printed on computer paper. But they all showed the same thing, strange shapes in the sky, barely visible against clouds, like tears in reality itself. Millbrook is old. Jack began closing the door behind Sarah. Older than the records show. Native Americans wouldn't settle here. Called it the place where the sky watches. White settlers came in 1847, thought they could tame it. Built this town from nothing. Within a year, half of them were dead or mad. He pulled out a ledger from 1848, its pages yellowed and brittle. Sarah could see entries written in careful script. March 3rd, Samuel Perkins looked skyward during evening prayer. Found 3 days later, repeating star coordinates in dead languages. March 17th, the Miller children vanished. Footprints led to clearing, then stopped pointing upward. The survivors figured out the rules through trial and error, Jack continued. Each rule is written in somebody's blood, somebody's sacrifice. The night sky rule was the first. The woods at night was the second. By the time they'd established all 12 rules, only 43 people remained out of the original 200. Sarah felt sick. What are they, the Watchers? Jack pulled out a sketch, a rendering so detailed it could only have been drawn from direct observation. It showed the same creature Sarah had seen at her mother's window, but this drawing revealed more details. The thing had no eyes, but across its surface were hundreds of tiny mouths, all moving independently. Best theory: they're not from here, not from our reality. Millbrook sits on a thin place where the membrane between worlds is weak. They can't fully cross over, but they can watch. They can influence, they can call. And if you acknowledge them, if you see them, they can... He paused, searching for the right word. Connect to you. Can it be reversed? Sarah asked desperately. Can my mother be saved? Jack's silence was answer enough. But then he said, there's one thing that's never been tried, because it requires breaking another rule. Which one? Rule 4, never enter the church basement. The church sat at the center of Millbrook like a rotting tooth. It had been built the same year as the town, and according to local legend, it was the only building the Watchers feared. No one knew why. The basement had been sealed in 1923 after Reverend William Blake went down there and came back up, speaking in tongues. His hair turned white, his hands covered in symbols that hadn't been carved there, they'd simply appeared on his skin like stigmata. Sarah stood outside the church at 8:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the sky became forbidden. Jack stood beside her carrying a backpack full of flashlights, salt, and iron implements. In his other hand, he held a crowbar. Last chance to turn back, he said. Once we break this rule, there's no guarantee the others will still protect us. Sarah thought of her mother staring endlessly upward, trapped between worlds. Open it. The church was never locked, another oddity of Millbrook. The interior was sparse wooden pews, arranged in perfect rows, an altar with a cross that had been carved from a single piece of black wood. Behind the altar was a door, and on that door were 7 padlocks of different ages, each one added by a different generation. Jack worked quickly the crowbar, making obscene cracking sounds as each lock broke free. The last one fell away at 8:56 p.m. 4 minutes until the sky became death. The basement stairs descended into darkness so complete it seemed to swallow their flashlight beams. The air rising from below was cold and carried a smell Sarah recognized from her mother's room, that overripe fruit smell, but stronger, older, like something had been rotting down there for a very long time. They descended. 20 steps down, then 20 more. The stairs should have ended. The church wasn't that tall, but they kept going. 30 steps, 40, 50. The temperature dropped with each step, their breath turning to visible mist. At step 63, they reached the bottom. The basement was impossibly vast, stretching beyond the reach of their lights. The walls were covered in writing, thousands upon thousands of words carved into stone layered over each other, until they became a chaos of meaning. Sarah recognized some of the languages, English, Spanish, Latin, others she couldn't identify. But they all said the same thing, repeated over and over: don't look up, don't look up, don't look up. In the center of the room sat a well. It was constructed from the same black wood as the cross upstairs, and from its depths came a sound like wind or breathing or screaming. It was impossible to tell which. Jesus Christ, Jack whispered. This is where it started. This is the thin place, the first tear. Sarah approached the well, And that's when she felt it, a pulling sensation, like gravity had reversed, trying to yank her upward instead of down. She looked at Jack and saw the same force affecting him, his feet barely touching the ground, his body straining against an invisible tether. "We shouldn't have come here," Jack said, his voice tight with panic. "This is where they live. This is where they—" He never finished the sentence. The flashlights died simultaneously, plunging them into absolute darkness. And in that darkness, Sarah heard her mother's voice clear as day coming from the well. "Baby, is that you? I can see you from here. I can see everything from here. It's beautiful, Sarah. Come look, come see what I see." "It's not her," Jack said. "Don't listen, it's mimicking." But Sarah was already moving toward the well. The compulsion was overwhelming, crushing her thoughts beneath its weight. She had to look. She had to know what her mother had seen. The not knowing was worse than any horror that might be waiting. Her hands found the edge of the well. The wood was warm, pulsing like a heartbeat. She leaned over, peering into depths that had no bottom. And in those depths, something looked back. It wasn't one entity. It was thousands, millions, all pressed together like a mass of writhing bodies, all looking up at her with hunger that transcended anything Sarah could comprehend. They were starving, she realized, desperate. They existed in a place beyond time and space, feeding on the only thing that leaked through from her world attention. Observation. The act of being seen gave them substance, gave them power, allowed them to reach through just a little bit more. That's why the rules existed. Not to protect the town from the Watchers, but to starve them, to keep them weak, to prevent them from fully manifesting. Sarah felt herself being pulled down into that mass of desperate hunger. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. This was how her mother felt, she realized. This eternal falling, while standing still, this sensation of being observed by something vast and terrible and utterly alien. And then Jack grabbed her, yanking her back from the well with strength that belied his age. They fell together onto the stone floor, and Jack was pressing something into her hand, cold iron shaped into a cross. "Close your eyes," he shouted. "Don't look, don't give them the satisfaction." Sarah squeezed her eyes shut and pressed the iron cross to her chest. The pulling sensation lessened, but didn't disappear. She could feel the Watchers' rage, their frustration, their hunger turning to anger. Above them, the church began to shake. Stone dust rained down from the ceiling. The writing on the walls started to glow with a sickly bioluminescent light, and Sarah could see the words changing, updating themselves. She looked into the well. She saw us. She is ours now. "Run!" Jack screamed. They ran for the stairs, scrambling up as the basement behind them filled with sound. 1,000 voices screaming, calling Sarah's name, begging her to look back, to look up, to see them one more time. They burst through the church door at 9:02 p.m. 2 minutes past the forbidden hour. The sky above them was wrong. Sarah and Jack stood frozen in the church doorway. Their eyes locked on the ground, refusing to look up, despite every instinct screaming at them to see what was overhead. The sounds coming from above were indescribable, like fabric tearing, like bones breaking, like reality itself fracturing. "Don't look," Jack whispered, though his voice trembled with the effort of his own restraint. "For God's sake, don't look." They walked backward into the church, closing the door, cutting off the sounds from above. In the relative safety of the sanctuary, Jack collapsed onto a pew, his face ashen, his hands shaking so violently he couldn't hold his flashlight. "We woke them up," he said. "Going into the basement, disturbing the well, we made them active. The whole town is in danger now." Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from her grandmother. "Where are you?" "Something's wrong." Everyone's outside looking up. They ran. The streets of Millbrook were filled with people, and every single one of them stood motionless, faces tilted toward the sky, mouths slightly open. Sarah recognized neighbors, shopkeepers, the mailman, the woman who'd taught her piano. All frozen, all staring. And above them, just visible in Sarah's peripheral vision, were shapes. So many shapes. The sky was thick with them, like a swarm of cosmic insects, all pressing against the barrier of reality, all trying to push through. Sarah and Jack kept their eyes down, navigating through the crowd of frozen townspeople. They reached Sarah's house to find Eleanor standing in the driveway, one of the few people still moving, still in control. "I felt it," Eleanor said. "Whatever you did, you made them stronger." "How do we fix it?" Sarah asked. "There has to be a way." Eleanor looked at her granddaughter with sad, ancient eyes. "There might be. But it requires a sacrifice. Someone who's already connected to them. Someone who's already seen them." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Mom." Inside, Margaret Chen was no longer in bed. She stood at the window of her room, her back to the door, her head tilted at that impossible angle. But now Sarah could see what her mother had become. Her shadow on the wall was wrong, moving independently, reaching upward even as her body stood still. "Mom," Sarah said softly. Margaret turned. Her eyes were completely white, no iris, no pupil, just blank white surfaces that reflected nothing. When she spoke, it was in that chorus of voices, that terrible cacophony of the watchers speaking through her. "You came for us," they said through her mother's mouth. "You looked into the well. You saw us. Now you belong to us just as she does." "No," Sarah said, and her voice was stronger than she expected. "You're wrong. I closed my eyes. I didn't fully see you. You have no claim on me." The thing wearing her mother's face tilted its head, considering. "Perhaps, but we have her. And through her we can reach so many others. Your town gave us rules to starve us, but we are patient. We are eternal. And now because of you, we are awake." Eleanor stepped forward, holding something Sarah hadn't noticed before. A knife, old and stained, its handle wrapped in leather. "There's a 13th rule," she said quietly. "One that's not written down because it's only meant to be used once. The rule that ends all rules. Grandma, what are you? If one who has seen them willingly returns to the well, the connection can be severed. The tear can be sealed, but it's permanent. There's no coming back." Margaret's head swiveled toward Eleanor with a crack of vertebrae. "She cannot. She is ours." "She's not," Eleanor said. "Not yet. She's still in there fighting. I can see it." She pressed the knife into Sarah's hand. "You know what has to be done. Take her to the well. Let her choose. It's the only way." Sarah and her mother, or what remained of her mother, stood at the edge of the well in the church basement. They'd made the journey in silence, Jack and Eleanor staying above, maintaining the wards that kept the watchers from fully manifesting. In the darkness, Sarah could see glimpses of her mother's real face breaking through the blank white of her possessed eyes. Moments of lucidity, brief and painful. Sarah, her mother's real voice, small and frightened. "Baby, I'm sorry. I heard your father. I thought he'd come back." "I know, Mom. I know. They showed me things, beautiful things at first. But then," Margaret's face contorted, "then I saw what they really are. They're hunger, that's all. Just hunger wearing the shape of something meaningful. They wear our dead like masks to lure us in." The white eyes returned. The chorus of voices, "Give us the girl. Give us the one who looked but didn't see. Her potential sustains us more than 1,000 of you." Sarah gripped the knife. "Mom, Eleanor said there's a way. You can go into the well. You can seal the connection, but you have to choose it. It has to be willing." Margaret's real eyes flickered back, tears running down her cheeks. "I'm so tired, baby. I've been fighting them for weeks. Every second they're there, pulling at me, showing me horrors and calling them wonders." She touched Sarah's face with a trembling hand. "You got out once. You made it to the real world. Promise me you'll get out again. Promise me you'll run and never look back." "Mom, I can't just..." "Promise me." "I promise," Sarah whispered. Margaret smiled, and for a moment she looked like herself again. Then she stepped backward toward the well, and the watchers' voices became a roar of rage and hunger. "No, she is ours, the girl we want, the girl." But Margaret kept walking backward, her eyes locked on Sarah's. "I love you, baby. I'm sorry I brought you back here. I just wanted to see you one more time." She reached the edge of the well, stopped, looked up for the first time since her possession, and Sarah saw her mother's face transform, not with horror, but with defiance. "I see you," Margaret said to the things above. "I see what you really are, and you're nothing." She fell backward into the well. The sound that followed was indescribable. The entire church shook, the basement walls cracking, releasing a wind that smelled of ozone and something else, something like the smell after a fever breaks, like sickness leaving a body. Sarah ran for the stairs, the well collapsing behind her, black wood splintering and falling into depths that were finally mercifully closing. She burst out of the church to find the sky clear, truly clear, for the first time in Millbrook's history. The townspeople were waking up, confused, looking around, as if coming out of a dream. Jack and Eleanor stood waiting. They didn't ask what happened. They knew. "It's done," Eleanor said simply. "The connection is severed. They can't reach us anymore." Sarah looked up at the sky, really looked, without fear for the first time since childhood. It was just a sky, just stars, just the ordinary universe, beautiful and indifferent. But then she noticed something. The moon was out, full and bright, and on its surface she could just barely make out a shadow that looked like a face, her mother's face, watching, protecting. Sarah left Millbrook the next morning. This time she made it past the county line without incident. In her rearview mirror, she watched the town disappear into morning mist. She drove for 3 hours before she stopped for gas. While filling up, she noticed something on her arm, a symbol very faint, like a scar from a burn she'd never received. It looked like the carvings from the basement walls. The warnings. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The rules are gone, but we're still here. We're always here. And you looked into the well, Sarah Chen. You didn't see us completely, but you saw enough. When you dream, we'll be there. When you're alone in the dark, we'll be there. Not to take you, just to watch. Always watching. Your mother sealed the door, but she couldn't close the window. Sleep well. Sarah deleted the text with shaking hands, started her car, drove away. But that night in a motel room 3 states away, she woke at exactly 9 p.m. And without meaning to, without wanting to, she found herself looking at the ceiling, looking up, and in the shadows of the popcorn texture she saw them. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to know they were still there, just beyond the threshold of reality, pressed against the thin places, waiting. She turned on every light in the room and didn't sleep for the rest of the night. And in Millbrook, in a house on Maple Street, Eleanor Chen removed a piece of paper from her desk drawer and wrote a new rule at the bottom of the list, Rule 13, the one that would never be spoken aloud, but would be passed down in whispers. If you leave Millbrook, never forget, they're not bound by our walls. They're only bound by attention. Whatever you do, wherever you go, never look too long at anything. Because if you stare into the void doesn't just stare back. It remembers. The end. Or is it?